Hi guys, Patrick here, Eggnot Poker, and we're here for the fourth and final segment of our pre-flop presentation. Good luck to everybody. This is the last part of the slug we've got here. Good job. Not gonna lie, it's been a lot of work to go through if you've got to this final part. So well done to you. So we're going to finish on. We've got two parts. We've got a evaluation going over just a bit of a finale of everything that we've already covered, just as a finishing touch. But one of the main things we're going to go over beforehand is we're going to look at some example spots. So we've done a couple of brief ones previously in an earlier segment where we went through some of the spots. So we might be like defending the big blind and being a bit aggressive and so on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my trusty Holdem Calculator. And we're going to look at some scenarios of positions where we can talk about 3-betting, 4-betting, folding, opening, etc. Excuse me. So what we can do with this is we can play about with this and mess around. So what we're going to do first is we're going to look at some Rfi spots. Okay, so raise first in. So just to kind of confirm what we've been talking about and actually visually see what I'm talking about rather than just sitting there chatting shit. So if anyone remembers a bit of a question to you guys back at home, what do you think? What was the worst hand candidates that we can raise under the gun? Do you remember? So one of them was a suited king, and one of them was an offsuit queen. Let's see if anyone can remember. So it actually was queen jack offsuit, which would open roughly half the time. King 5 suited, which again would open roughly half the time. Then we had hands like ace 10 offsuit. So let's put some of these down. So we've got hands like, so we're under the gun. We've got hands such as king 5 suited. We've got hands like ace 10 off. We can technically have the connectors, but we're only going to be playing those if we have a reason to be opening them. But let's add them in there anyway, like 5-6 suited. We can have pocket pairs. We're generally looking at about 6s plus full frequency, and then the lower pocket pairs at discretion, but usually not too widely opened. Let's go with 6s. What else can we open? So offsuit broadways that aren't like ace 10. We've got queen jack, as we said. Hands like jack 10 and jack 9 off, we wouldn't suggest opening under the gun. We start getting a bit loose at that point. Offsuit ace x, again, you can maybe argue for a smidge of ace 9, depending on who you're against in the positions. But generally, these types of holdings. As we start going around the table, we just start adding on. So, for example, that king 5 suited under the gun, like a mixed frequency, would then start becoming a pure open or almost pure as you start moving to the next positions like the hijack, the cutoff, and so on. As we start getting towards the cutoff, we can start opening hands like queen 5 suited. We can start opening up more hands like 7-9 suited, for example, things like that. As we get towards the button and small blind, we can absolutely start going ham, and we can start opening like the jack 8 offs and to some extent, and hands like king 8 offsuits and some 9-10 offsuits in the small blind, etc. And we can start going from there. What we want to look at now in terms of pre-flop, that's quite important, obviously, is moving on from RFI, is let's go with being 3-bet first. So we're going to give some scenarios. So let's start off with, we raise under the gun. And we've got, let's go with queen jack suited. So we're going to have an open-minded GTO approach. So what that means is we're going to go with what the technical strategy wants us to do in most cases, and then also what our adaptations and deviations might look like against real-time opponents. So if I raise under the gun with queen jack suited, which I'm going to do 100% of the time, this is a nice good hand to open. Let's go with the hijack in a 6-max game. That's the next opponent on our left. And we've got this guy tagged as a tight regular who 3-bets us here. It folds round, and here we are. We'll just put the 2 there, meaning he's got any 2 at this point. Considerations. Oh, actually, let's go with strategic thoughts first. What do you guys think? Anything at all? Well, queen jack suited technically should be folding nearly pure at this point. It's not good enough to continue out of position. Doesn't really class that well in these positions. Excuse me, as a 4-bet very well at all, and would absolutely perform well as a fold. A couple of different examples. So let's take the same dynamic, and I'm going to give myself king queen offsuit. Again, raise UTG, tight regular in the hijack 3-bets us, folds round, here we are. So, excuse me, king queen offsuit again has decent properties for removal. Blocks ace king, blocks kings, blocks pocket queens, blocks ace queen. Really good, right? Fair. If you were against a different type of opponent and a different position, I would suggest you could maybe over 4-bet bluffing this spot against people, against some, I wouldn't say better regulars, but some like looser regulars who aren't as good, maybe weaker regs who are a bit more aggressive than they should be. We can look to over bluff here, maybe generate some overfolds from hands like 9s and 10s and 8s, maybe generate some overfolds from hands like ace jack suited, and then absolutely look to try and take it down pre-flop. However, again, strategically, this is a bit too loose to be using as a candidate. You'd rather use a hand that's like a suited ace that would may perhaps 4-bet here, or something like king 5 suited at some frequency, and then you'd also look to fold and call some of those combos as well, whereas this hand would look to fold. If I had a hand like king queen suited, strategically this would do very well and would mix, slightly prefer 4-bet and mix call, and wouldn't be looking to fold. If I had a hand like pocket queens in this dynamic, exact same positions, exact same tight regular opponent in the hijack 3-betting us, this would again start to consider, this wouldn't fold, excuse me, but would start considering to call and to sometimes 4-bet, which are both completely fine. Again, I wouldn't, well, this time I would not consider folding, but I would very, very strongly consider just calling pure here against a very tight opponent, because you're most likely, again, not exactly, but most likely going to be up against a very strong tight range. If our opponent's only got 2% or 1% 3-bet over a very large size, we might even look to just fold the pocket queens, because we're effectively set mining against an extremely strong death range at that point. I'm going to mix it up and I'm going to change up the positions now. So let's say, for example, we are defending this time. Let's say UTG opens under the gun. This is our under the gun opponent with any two. We're on the big blind and it folds around to us. We've got this guy tagged as a decent regular, and you've got a hand like king queen suited. So this is an interesting one against these dynamics. Remembering how polarized you want to be in the big blind. Technically, this hand class actually technically qualifies almost a pure call rather than a 3-bet, because this hand type is right on the cusp between, like, if I was to 3-bet this for value, the worst hand that our opponent can call with that we beat is a hand like ace jack suited or ace 10 suited, which might look to fold sometimes against the big blind. And a lot of villains continuing range, whether it's a call or a raise, 4-bet, would be extremely strong, and some bluffs in it as well, which would absolutely crush king queen and put it in a horrible spot and cause a pretty decent hand, instead of going post flop, to then absolutely have to get binned to pre or moving into post in a very horrible position. Having a hand like ace king, or go with ace king off as well, this doesn't pure 3-bet in theory either. Similar principles, because this protects, again, it's mostly 3-bets, something like 70-75% I would say off the top of my head, but this protects a lot of other hands that wouldn't 3-bet, that stop us from being capped. This hand can absolutely 3-bet and get some value from the UTG's continuing range, and it's okay versus a 4-bet as well. However, if you're against a very tight opponent, or even just a generally weak reg, even some of the better regs, I hate to say it, and it pains me to say it, but one of the really decent exploits and kind of like a fundamental change towards away from GTO is, instead of defending some of the time as a call, I would look to defend this in these later positions almost all the time. Just because I feel like, unless it's against a fish or like a spaz monkey or something, but it's just, you're just going to get a lot of money by calling here, and it feels wrong, because it is horrible. It's kind of nitty and horrible. But as an exploit against a lot of the player pool, we don't want to 3-bet and make them fold a hand like ace queen off or ace 10 suited if they're going to overfold, and then look to kind of constrict their range. You absolutely get called by worse as well, but you know, we kind of want to be in this mindset where you can get ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 to open under the gun, king queen, etc. Get just called by the big blind, under respect how strong and polarized and how strong the big blind can be when it just calls, and then value bet worse against us, rather than kind of being a turtle shell mode where they're kind of scared and don't put a lot of money in, and may not even call down with hands like ace, as strong as ace queen or king queen on the top pair boards. So, you know, against those types of people who tend to overfold, these might be considerations. In terms of bluffing then, so something a bit different. So let's say, for example, we are, let's go with a different configuration. So let's say we're on the button this time, we're over here. And we've got, well, let's say the cutoff opens and they're just an average regular. Maybe an ABC 18, 16, 7, something like that. A little bit tighter side. Has some 3-bets that aren't just the nuts, whatever. They open any 2 in the cutoff. We 3-bet them on the button, and here we are. What type of hand candidates do you guys think at home that would be good? So let's think of some bluff candidates. Well, we've already gone over many of them, but let's go over a few more. Again, we're looking for candidates that might be either suited or unsuited, that have blocking properties against villains' continuing range and value range, and unblocks their faults. So, for example, if our opponent is relatively tight average and raises on the cutoff, a decent hand to 3-bet might be something like King 10 offsuit, King Queen off, King 9 suited. Let's go with King 5 suited. We're getting a bit saily at this point in terms of strategic. We're actually getting a bit out of line here. But again, if your opponents aren't exploiting you and they're overfolding and it's overperforming, and we're doing pretty well with them post-flop, which you generally will do because you can just get a lot of folds post-flop and play pretty well, is using these more as 3-bet bluffs rather than linear ranges such as King 10 or King Jack suited. And you might look to sometimes call these more often. Not all the time, but some of the time. In theory, these will also call some of the time in places like the cutoff, the button, and the small blind, as well as the big blind as well. Generally, the only place it doesn't tend to flat call is mostly the hijack, just as a bit of random information for you. But again, same thing, if you've got a generally good opponent and you're looking to play against them, when they open the cutoff, you might have some more linear hands. You might add in some Queen Jack suiteds, some Jack 10 suiteds, etc. Because you can play well post flop and you can face 4-bets and we can fold, we can we can continue with some range. And we add more hands to our range that don't make us look just like we have exactly what we are representing most of the time, which is like nutted ranges like queens, aces, kings, ace king, ace queen suited, what have you. Again, let's look at a different configuration now. Let's go to the big blind. So again, let's say the button opens any 2 cards that they're supposed to in their range, and then we're in the big blind. So generally our opponents are going to be opening something from like 2.5 to 3, 3.5x, something like that, usually around sort of 2.5, 3. We've got combos such as King 5 offsuit. This is a bit out of line against the button, I would say. I would start playing a bit closer to GTO, which would be away from this. If our opponent was on the small blind, some of the time, like 10-15%, a hand like this can be a very polar aggressive bluff as a 3-bet. In the big blind versus the button or other positions, it really wouldn't. It would look to mainly fold. So against the button still, let's give some other combinations. Let's give ourselves a hand like King Queen suited. These types of hands are just very strong and can absolutely just get value from worse against the button. Same with the small blind most of the time as well. You can just absolutely 3-bet this relentlessly for value, and opponents should be calling pretty worse with worse. One thing we haven't gone through as much, and I'm just going to kind of go with it on the fly, is the small blind. So the small blind's interesting. The small blind, as we said previously, well, very briefly previously, was that it's very linear, which means it's got a solid fundamental base of cards. It's not really super polarized. It hasn't just got King 4 suited and stuff like that. It's just like strong non-suited broadways plus, strong 9-10 suited plus connected combos, strong ace-x suited combos, a couple of linear smaller ones, but it's pretty strong. It doesn't really have any kind of out to sea hands in it. Maybe Queen Jack offsuit at some frequency. Maybe King 10 / King Jack is the kind of cutoff point for like lowest hands, as well as like Queen Jack off. And then most of the decent pairs, as some of the lower mid pairs as well, but a lower frequency. What I'm trying to get at is, in terms of 3-betting, it's pretty general, it's pretty linear, it's pretty generally strong. Interesting thing to note though, we said the big blind is extremely aggressive, which it is. Blind on blind strategy is something we haven't covered, and is something that I think is better put in a single video because it's so detailed, I think anyway, is the fact that the small blind should be very aggressive against the big blind. The big blind then defends by being extremely aggressive and polarized against it. And then the small blind then recounters. So again, in the micro stakes and the low stakes, that's GTO that is, you're not going to encounter particularly aggressive big blinds. But what you might encounter is not so much what you'll encounter, but what you can use against the big blind is when people will be over 3-betting hands like their, king queens and their like ace tens and offsuits and things like that. You can absolutely, people who 3-bet too much in the big blind with the wrong types of combos, is you can absolutely, and again this is with a pinch of salt like we said with the previous 4-betting, is you can potentially 4-bet bluff a lot with some of these offsuit combos and suited ace-x like ace-5, ace-6, ace-7, ace-8, queen-9 suited, jack-9 suited, some other hands with the offsuit combos like king-10, king-jack, queen-jack, king-queen, ace-jack, offsuit. These play very well as 4-bet responses rather than calls, and it stops you from tipping over and folding too much against an aggressive big blind. That's interesting because at these lower levels you may not encounter that, but if you do get an aggressive good big blind, which is rare, but if it happens, the small blind can absolutely fight that back with more bouncy 4-bets as well, like a ping pong table against it. So that's a couple of examples to look at. So we're going to finish on a bit of an evaluation and then we're finished for our presentation. So, evaluation. Number 1, maximizing value when you have it, especially against fish. Like we said, these are all just our evaluation points, just going over some of the most important parts of the presentation, just to food for thought to think about before we're done. Again, every time we have it against recreational players, players we target and mark as recreationals or fishy players, when you've got these hands, guys, maximize that value because that's where the majority of our money is coming from. Over bluff, tight, cap, weak ranges. Pretty obvious, right? But again, not emphasized. If you know that your opponents are not protected in their checks and you know that you've got a kind of marginal showdown hand which probably isn't going to win and can't really call if they probe turn or river, but you know they're absolutely going to fold a lot, then this might be a really good time to go after these like small capped range pots, especially multi-way as well. Like, just don't shy away from them. In fact, if anything, be more aggressive in multi-way pots because people are very tight and very honest. They're honest in general, let alone multi-way pots as well. And then we're looking to overfold marginal holdings versus tight, weak, nitty opponents, whether they're recreationals or regulars or whatever. Even against decent players at like 50NL, 100NL, a lot of these players they're just so tight in a lot of spots that you have to be really careful and don't just say to yourself, right, this hand has to call because I've checked it, simmed it, I know it's a good call. Avoid what we call artificial callers, where it's like I've got pocket queens and I'm getting jammed on by a guy who's jamming 1%, 2% of hands. He might be called 5-betting, he might be called 4-betting, whatever it is. And you know the guy over a decent sample is just going to show you aces and kings, ace-king suited, maybe the other pair of queens. Pocket queens, pocket jacks, ace-king off is not doing well against that range. So you can avoid these artificial callers. I reminded myself of it today, actually. I played a few hands on 50. And I'm just like slapping myself on the back of the head, like, what the fuck are you doing? Because I had a spot where it was like, I had the guy marked as a decent reg, I had a pretty good sample. So I don't hate myself for playing like this, but I had an ace-jack suited. Guy opens, like, long story short, he opens like, I think he opens MP. No, he opens hijack. I 3-bet MP with ace-jack suited. Folds around, he 4-bets me, I look at his 4-bet stat, and he's got like 7% 4-bet, fine. I call in position, boards jack high, bets the flop, call, check turn, and then jams river. So it's kind of like a situation where it's like, I can't possibly fold, but I can't possibly win against Villain's jamming range for value, and Villain doesn't have enough bluffs that go all in. So it's kind of like, I just called it off because I'm an adult, I'm not a child. I just know I've got a really good hand, the guy can have some bluffs here, I call. But again, I just get shown aces and, away we go. I don't think it's terrible, but personally, like looking back at it, just the way the population tendencies play, is this a spot where I want to stick in an extra 60, 70 bigs or whatever on the river, whereas I could just look for different situations? It's tough because, if this is a different player in a different pool, it's kind of tough to be folding top of range, but sometimes top of range isn't top of range, depending on the opponent you're against. So I don't hate that, and that's not the best example, but it's just, think about it when you're in these types of awkward spots with how far you're willing to put a lot of money in against people who don't really tend to bluff enough, especially in the river all-in spots and when they make themselves look weak as well. Absolutely need to throw in more traps. So think about having more protected lines. Traps and protected lines versus regulars instead of bet, default, protect the checks. Basically, again, it's already been covered, so I'm not going to go over it too much. But if I'm c-betting like all my top pairs, and then just betting turn, betting river, if I'm against a recreational, I like it. We don't have millions of hands that want to just either open or 3-bet or 4-bet and just bet, shove. We do have some, plenty of them, but there are a lot of hands that just can't. They face over, like you've got pocket jacks. You really just want to start like jamming turns and rivers when aces and kings are out on the board, etc. Like a lot of hands will default bet and then check. Protect your range. Like against decent regs, they know and expect that the populations in these tendencies and their tendencies, and they're right, I suppose, don't really protect the checks. So they go after them, which is something we've said you should do in these games, which is fine. But you need to make sure that your range is against the better players or the tighter players. The more looser and fishy aggressive players can be protected. So you can actually make money by forcing mistakes, like betting top pair and checking turn to induce, or just to allow yourself to then bet the river and get 2 good streets of value, rather than bombing flop and then overfolding turns. Whereas when you're then bluffing, you can go the other way and exploitatively just barrel and blast everything, because they're just not going to exploit you. They're just not going to find the calls. Polar value and bluffs work super well versus weak type populations. So again, our King 5 suited as a bluff, Ace 6 suited as a bluff, Ace Jack suited more as a linear call, which is what we're adopting in the next bullet point. Polarized bluffs and polarized value is really good against weak players, nitty players, because you just make life easy and you get to play really well against them. Whereas when you're against better players, or you're just playing against better regulars or a better stake in general, we can adopt more linear calls in position. So again, calling Ace Jack suited, calling Ace Queen off sometimes to keep the ranges wider, and also just to allow ourselves to kind of under-rep our hand a little bit. This can be exploited, but at these levels, are they really being exploited? Not really, right? Not really. Abusing HUD stats. Again, if we know a guy's 4-betting 1% of the time over 2,000 hands and you've got queens, should we just fold? Probably. We probably don't make a whole bunch of money by calling or getting it in. So again, potentially dodging an artificial caller for 70, 80 bigs extra. If you're playing against the micro stakes and the low stakes, remember there are no rules. The rule is there are no rules. It's just that simple. Don't, again, there's so many streamers and players and people are like, you've got to do this because this is what the solver says. I fucking love solvers all fucking day long. But the thing is, at micro stakes and low stakes, if you're only playing a solver strategy, yeah, you might still win, but there's so many situations where you lose more money and that you don't make the maximum. It's only protecting your, GTO is not just about trying to maximize value. Another heavy priority of GTO is to just maintain balance and deception and protection in every single part of the game tree. So you're not over bluffing, you're not underfolding, you're meeting defense frequencies, you're getting as much value as you can, and then you're protecting all of your lines. You don't just check, second pair or third pair, get to the river and have no hands that can then call or raise, etc. People don't exploit you how you think they do. So go after them. If there's spots where they overfold, if there's spots where they absolutely over have it, it's enough said, really, isn't it? It's simple enough. And then finally, avoiding, as we said, most importantly, avoiding artificial callers versus nits. And I call them spanners. Just absolute donuts who just absolutely play their hand awful, but just absolutely just give you the information that you don't even need to work for to figure out how strong the hand is. The people who lead the nuts into the river when the board when it's just absolutely not necessary. Excuse me. When it's absolutely not necessary, they tell you how strong your hand is and let you get away and so on. And the people who just just never bluff and then absolutely go ham with their check shoves for 6x pot and then just absolutely just have the nuts. Just let them play really badly against you and just go from there. It's the micro stakes and low stakes aren't hard. Fundamentally, it's just there is some weird and wonderful stuff down there, but just keep keep bluffing everybody and keep folding, and that's basically the way it is. You're going to get some better players sometimes and some aggro tards and people who might just play quite well. Then you will have to call down, and you will have to call some 3-bets and call down, and that's fine. But, you know, there's just not many of them compared to the tight death pools who don't really understand how to beat the game. So they just death turtle and, you know, limp call and don't 3-bet ace king and, you know, stuff like that. So that's it, guys. This is my evil rabbit. Make this is the face we want to make. Every time we don't pay a nit, every time we bluff a nit, that's the face we want to make. This gentleman here is absolutely the guy we want to be when we're thinking about making these nits folding. So just as a finish, I'd just like to say, you know, again, thank you. Like, I'm trying to grow this channel. It's a complete free channel. I'm not offering coaching. I'm not like shucking coaching and stuff out there. That's not what I'm here for. I just want to chuck my 2 cents out there and just, you know, just say, look, here I am. This is the stuff I think you should be doing. You know, I really hope it's helpful to you, and I hope it, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that's good and a lot of stuff out there that's bad. I'm not saying my content's the best, because it's absolutely not, but I'm just hoping it's relative and that you can use it to make yourself as a better player and grow. So please like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel and my videos. I really hope you get on all right with them. And I do have a new Discord channel as well. The link is here. I guess I can put it in the description as well, but it's also on here if you want to have a gander. Thank you very much, guys, and see you in the next one.